Can hear the sound of the rain on the windows, and the wind's getting up and it's dark and it feels very, very end of yeary. And yet, of course, it's also a time of beginnings. Last week I was talking a little bit around Rohatsu when we celebrate the awakening of the Buddha. It's also the season of Christmas when we celebrate the birth of Jesus. So it's a time of endings and a time of beginnings. And of course, immediately after Christmas, we'll have the New Year. Time of New Year's resolutions, time of gym subscriptions, dry January, or resolutions that I will sit every day or sit more or something. And the turning of the year marks a passage of time, but in the sense that time's arrow moves ever forward with each tick of the clock. The past becomes the past. The future is still out there. But time goes in one direction, irreversible. And this is in some ways quite different from the conventional Buddhist cosmology sense of time here, which is much more about a cyclical time, a turning, a circle. There's certainly no sense in Buddhist cosmology of a final state, or even really of any kind of definitive event. There's certainly no teleology, should we say, a purpose, a goal, an end point. And that becomes more pronounced within the Mahayana tradition than Theravadan Buddhism. And I think that's part of the meaning why Mahayana always sees Shakyamuni and his awakening as one of a series, an infinite series, extending back into the past and forward into the future of awakenings of Buddhas. And of course, why it likes to proliferate the number of worlds and Buddha worlds, because in this cosmology there is no creation. There is never a time when this wasn't so, and there is never a time when it won't be so. And obviously the temptation there is just to rush off and say, oh, does this agree with contemporary astrophysics? And if it does, we cheer, and if it doesn't, we boo. And all of that, at face value, in a sense of true or false, is part of what Shakyamuni always talked about as stupid questions, irrelevant questions. Because how does that matter to my life now? How does that tie in to my own suffering? The suffering of all beings, the suffering of the world. And I think what I want to come from with this is the truth of images. The clock ticks. 2024 becomes 2025. What's changed? What will actually have changed? What is the nature of this event? And obviously, so much is talking about division, separation, change from one state to another state. That actually, this image of the infinite chain of Buddhas is about the not separate nature of change and changelessness. in one sense, it's an embodiment of the idea of an infinitely extending universe in both directions. But in another sense, it's just saying, well, this event isn't unique, that happened at one specifiable moment in time. It's a process. It's a process in which we're all engaged. It's not we can think and we can clearly contrast with the birth of Christ and the crucifixion of Christ. For the Christian, this moment changes everything. There is the world before and there is the world after. And although we do say, it's the wonderful complexity and richness of Buddhism, that, in the moment of Shakyamuni's Buddha's enlightenment, all beings achieve enlightenment. But then all beings have already achieved enlightenment an infinite number of times and will continue to do so in the future. It's deliberately making things more complex than just a straightforward da-dum, 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 tick, tick, tick. Time, and our lives in time and our lives as time are more complex than this, and so are endings and beginnings. And of course the Heart Sutra and so many of the other sutras talk about no coming, no going, no arising, no ceasing, no birth, no death. And as we ask, well, in what sense do I take that literally? Well, actually, I don't take that literally. Again, we're talking about change and changelessness as not separate. And it's perfectly true that there is, as we say, at the absolute level, no birth, no death. Does that mean I live forever? Well, no, because here, and there's nowhere else to be, there is birth and death. But birth and death not in the absolute way that we like to think of them. And then, of course, I was listening to a talk that somebody pointed me to the other day where a teacher I much respect in many ways, saying, well, of course, one thing we know about Zen is time doesn't exist. And you kind of go, not again. Because some ways this is, well, in some ways it can be a helpful thing to say. Get us out of our rut of thinking in terms of clock time and, what'll happen if, and, I need to be there then, and whatever. But another sense, it's a very dumb thing to say because obviously time exists. Try saying that to your credit card company. Didn't make the payment because, time doesn't exist. Try explaining that to the police when they tow your car away because it's not insured. Time doesn't exist. I didn't think it was necessary. I'm above that kind of thing. No, and then obviously the way that those of us who remember back this far will remember Y2K and the Millennium Bug and the very real sense of fear that, the world as we knew, culture as we knew, was going to collapse just because they hadn't set up the date and time in advance on computers, thinking, well, one day we're going to get to the year 2000. So time very definitely exists. It just doesn't exist in the way that we think it does, because time, coming into being, ceasing to be, are relative, conventional. There's no reason why we have to measure in hours and seconds. There's no real reason why we have to measure at all. But we do, and we choose to. And so it struck me that in actual fact, our appreciation of time we're actually, if we think about it a little, we can clearly not only see, but experience, and this is the work of this talk, we can directly experience the tension that is within not separate. This isn't just some lovely cozy thing we say, oh, we're all not separate, it's all lovely. It's the actual experiencing of this. So if we say time's conventional, it's conventional in that sense in the same way that money is. Money is a convention. It has no actual existence, no essence. Money doesn't exist. Well, again, yes it does, and no it doesn't, and not quite in the way that we think it does, because it's conventional. Money works, money operates in our societies because we want it to, because we believe it does, because we will accept that this is a useful way of living, a good way of operating. And some of us may say, well, I think there might be better ways that we could organise this. But basically, we start off by finding something which is hard to find and therefore precious. And we start out with gold. And then we realise that actually, no, it's really conventional. You don't actually need anything which we really think is truly valuable, like gold, because there's not very much of it about and it's shiny. No, you can just get slips of paper for gold. You know, I promise to pay the bearer on demand. And then we can go, well, yeah, actually, as long as we all pretend that we could pay the bearer the gold on demand, that's fine, that'll work too. Becomes even more conventional. And then, of course, we get credit and debt. Yeah, well, I'll borrow some money which sort of references gold but which doesn't actually exist, and if I say I've borrowed that off you, then I'll give, and we get ever more rarefied. And of course now the closest we ever get to anything like money most of the time is just these minute differences in electrical potential in a server somewhere in Ireland, or some vast data centre in, I don't know, Argentina, wherever. But because we collectively agree that this is the way things are going to be, because this sort of works for us, money in that sense exists. It just has no real, absolute, final existence. And the same is really the case with time. We can measure clock time. We agree on our divisions, and then we can relate that to actual genuine physical processes, the rhythmic pulse of a crystal when you squeeze it, the radioactive decay of an atomic nucleus. These are real things in a slightly different sense, though still conventional, because they're all abstractions, they're all descriptions of the world that are kind of accurate and kind of not, and that's the whole point about, the relative world. But then there are so many other senses of time as well, aren't there? There's the time of, well, my breath. And now we're really close to our sitting, just this sensation, breath by breath. And under that, the beat of my heart. Each breath the same but different. Each beat of my heart the same but different. With each breath, with each beat of my heart, I'm one breath, one heartbeat closer to my death. Farther away from my birth. This chain, this line. And within that, all the time I'm growing, I'm creating new cells, I'm dying at the same time. Other cells are dying. The physical processes that used to work in one way begin to work in another. The Dalai Lama was always fond of saying, I'm dying from the moment of my birth. Yeah, perfectly true, absolutely. These processes are always co-present, not separate. There's the cyclical processes which we actually see around us, the passage of the seasons. The nights growing longer and then they'll be growing shorter again, or the tides rising and falling, the passage of planets, moons round the planets round the sun, the spiral of the spiral diaxis. These are all different senses of time. And some of these we experience directly, like my breath, like my heartbeat. Do I experience? Well, yes, I do experience the seasons too, don't I? It's not just those of us who get seasonal affective disorder. We get depressed when the autumn comes. Well, no, my body changes. I respond differently to the weather, to the world, to the light levels. These are all senses in which we're, you could say, inhabited by time, but which we are time. Because unless we are wanting to conceive of time as something separate, out there, not part of us, then this is time. This is time manifesting as us, directly in my experience. And that's before we get on to the really, in some ways, almost more intimate mind stuff. 2024, 2025, what's changed? I think it's impossible, isn't it? And certainly there's the question, well, should we? Impossible not to feel this sense of closure. And in some sense to offer ourselves and the world a kind of judgment. Success and failure. What kind of a year has it been for you? How has that worked? And similarly, the sense of anticipation. Maybe I'm going to make loads of New Year's resolutions I don't keep. Maybe I will keep some of them. Who knows? And that's the beauty of the future. We never actually know. It's open. Not knowing. Beginner's mind in each moment. And yeah, in one sense it is. It's a different me shows up for each moment. But always with this sense of the memory of the past, my views of the past, my judgments on the past. And those not as intellectual ideas that I shouldn't be have anything to do with because there's no such thing as time. This is time as me. This is my experience. This is how I experience myself as time. And similarly with the future, with my hopes, my fears for the future, my aspiration, my anticipation, my not knowing the future. Because that's what makes the future. And the sense in which it took a whole universe to bring me here, at this moment, now, into being. The interdependence and interaction of everything to get me, this time, moment, event, or whatever I want to call myself, right here, right now. Yeah, which kind of takes me in the direction of regret as well. What I wish I'd done, or how I wish it had turned out, or what difference would that have made? What difference would it have made if I'd taken different A-levels at school, married that person rather than that person? Oh, where would I be now? Which in one sense we can't help but doing, in another sense is, that is madness, because that hypothesis that perhaps isn't me, because I'm this, because I'm all that brought me here. I'm everything that brought me here now, which we can call karma in the widest sense, and however we want to figure those causal processes in our own understanding of the world, of my life, of Zen. So we look back and we look forward. And we can't help but do that. So let's do the work. Let's allow ourselves to feel those feelings, experience those feelings. We can see what patterns they form. We can see how they tie up with the tension in our bodies. We can see one thought leading to another. We might notice something interesting and we might want to follow it up, or we might literally just sit as this and hold just this anticipation, hope, memory, regret, whatever. My life as it is, this real experiencing of this actual body, here, now, as an embodiment of the universe, as an embodiment of time. And look forward onto the not knowing. Endings, beginnings. These are one of the most intimate ways we can experience not separate. The conventionality, the relativity of the relative world. It sounds dry as dust put like that. But my hopes, my fears, my love, these are all very real things. And this is the experience of non-separation, and this is myself as time.